So are we good to go, Jake? Okay, awesome. So hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is streaming on YouTube and on Facebook Live, so there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So welcome to our third town hall format for East Bay, our Revolution group. We've got 4 amazing speakers for you tonight, and they will be introduced. So what we've been doing is examining justice from every angle. We started off with criminal justice, rolled into education, and now tonight we are doing housing justice, which is pretty apropos with everything that's going on with the potential evictions and mortgage crisis that we're going through. And we're exploring justice from all areas. History is very important because without knowing where you came from or what happened in the past, it's really hard to come up with appropriate solutions. We're obviously a global society now. We want to pull great ideas from wherever they come from. And most importantly, we want to be able to take action. Great ideas are great ideas, but unless you do something about them, they don't really matter. A little bit of the backstory, if you are new to us, Our Revolution East Bay is now formed. Our Revolution Contra Costa has merged with Our Revolution East Bay to make a stronger, more active group so that we can endorse more candidates, get more progressive candidates elected to office, work on more propositions and issues out there. So we are now one big happy family here in the East Bay. And, you know, Our Revolution came out of the Bernie Sanders campaign way back in 2016. It's definitely evolved a lot now. There are a lot of interesting people on board. One of my personal favorites, Nina Turner. We take a lot of direction and inspiration from her. Jim Hightower, Larry Cohen, Ben Jealous, James Buckley, all amazing people in the progressive fight. These are the stats for Our Revolution East Bay before the merger. Contra Costa also endorsed a large number of candidates, and 30 of those won. I think combined, we were probably close to 80% of our endorsed races won in 2020. Most of our candidates were also endorsed by Our Revolution National. So we are probably the largest, most powerful grassroots progressive organization out there, especially fighting at the local level. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to one of my fellow board members who is going to introduce these speakers. And then I will circle back around with you, introduce our panelists, Andy Kelly, Alyssa Victory, Nicole Gardner, and Anna Marie Avia Ferris. And you can ask questions. So YouTube, Facebook Live, we have somebody monitoring that. So if you have a burning question, please put it there. So Sherry, without further ado, I am going to stop the share so that we can see you. You're muted, Sherry.
I'm muted. What would a Zoom meeting be without somebody saying you're muted, Sherry? Thanks, Susanna. I have the privilege of introducing tonight's speakers. As a member of Our Revolution East Bay, the Alameda Progressives, and the Alameda Justice Alliance, housing as a human right has always been one of my top priorities. The program tonight will begin with Dr. Stephen Barton. Dr. Barton has a Ph.D. in City and Regional Planning from Cal Berkeley. He is currently the president of the Bay Area Community Land Trust. Dr. Barton is also the former director of housing for the city of Berkeley. He has authored numerous articles on the history of urban progressive movements, including the rent control and affordable housing movements in Berkeley. Dr. Barton, we are honored you could join us tonight.
Thank you very much. Shall I go ahead now, or do you want to introduce all the speakers first?
No, I think we'll do it one at a time. So you have the stage.
All right. So one of my favorite quotes about the housing crisis comes from a planning professor named Peter Marcuse, who said something along the lines of that we don't have a housing crisis because the system doesn't work. We have a housing crisis because that is the way the system works. And That's true no matter whether you're in a growing area like the San Francisco Bay Area, or if you're in an area that's been in tremendous decline, such as, say, the cities of Detroit or Cleveland. That's the way the system works. But let's focus in on the San Francisco Bay Area, and particularly, the East Bay. So if you take a rental apartment in Berkeley and compare it to an identical rental apartment in, say, Modesto, the apartment in Berkeley will rent for basically twice as much. Now, it doesn't cost twice as much to operate and maintain a rental apartment in Berkeley. The costs are actually pretty comparable. But there is a big difference, and that is the location. Now, the landlord has nothing to do with making the location in Berkeley more valuable in this economy than the location in Modesto. The landlord can at best take responsibility for the building, and usually they've hired other people to actually operate and maintain the building. But so, what's going on here? Why is it that this location in Berkeley is so much more valuable? Well, it's because the Bay Area has a tremendously growing economy, generating lots of high-paying and low-paying jobs. But that economy didn't happen just sort of by itself because people in Silicon Valley dreamed up new inventions. That economy grew because this is a beautiful area to live in. It's because government provides transportation and education system, parks, for that matter, to the extent that the Bay was preserved. It's been preserved by, government intervention, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission and other such things. And because the Bay Area has a very diverse and creative people who live here that make it attractive for other diverse and creative people to live here and help attract the people who have created this growing economy. So it's a social creation that we've all taken part in. And for those of us that are fortunate enough to be homeowners, we could have the feeling that in a general sense, our contribution to the Bay Area and making it a great place to live is rewarded by increasing property values. Renters also contribute to making the Bay Area a great place to live. And what is their reward? Well, their landlords raise their rents. So basically what the real estate industry is about is privatizing the socially created value of land, of access to locations in the Bay Area. Now, it's often said that, whoa, well, this is just temporary. If only government would get out of the way, then the market will produce plenty of new housing. And this is obviously not true. The market produces new housing for the highest income tenants. The economy is producing jobs for people at a wide range of income levels, not just high income people. In fact, it's not only that the market only responds to the highest income tenants in terms of producing new rental housing, it's worse than that, because unless there are rent control protections in place, the landlords can raise the rents, displace the existing tenants, bring in the new high income tenants who are moving in. And the result is that actually reduces the market for new construction, because a lot of those high income people that move into the area proceed to displace low income tenants, take over their units, and are no longer part of the market for new rental housing. So this is one of those ironic things, because you all hear that from the real estate industry that, oh, rent control discourages new construction. But the fact is, not having rent control discourages new construction by allowing higher income tenants to displace people who are already here that have lower incomes. Now, so rent control is an essential protection to restrain the unearned profits that come from the rising rents that landlords can get because the larger economy is growing. But it's obviously not enough. So, how do we deliver affordable housing to the existing lower income tenants and to the people who are moving in to take the growing number of relatively lower income jobs? Well, basically, there needs to be investment in nonprofit housing that is going to stay out of the market and where rents will stay relatively low. Now, in other words, basically, investment in housing needs to be considered as part of the infrastructure of a decent society, the same as building the necessary schools, hiring the necessary teachers, building roads, building transit, building parks, and all of those things. We need housing that's affordable to everyone. Now, it's important to understand that investing in housing that is not for profit, whether it's a nonprofit housing corporation that owns it, a limited equity housing cooperative, or perhaps a community land trust, such as I'm involved in, that when you pay the capital costs of the housing up front, you still need for the tenants to be able to, the residents to be able to pay enough money to cover the costs of operation and maintenance. And we live in a society that has such a weak safety net, that is so tolerant of extreme poverty, that there are an awful lot of people out there who can't afford the $500 or $600 a month that it typically may cost, and sometimes a bit more, to operate and maintain rental housing. And so for those people, it's absolutely essential that, that we work on creating a system that provides, a decent minimum wage, unions, higher incomes for the elderly and disabled, and so on. None of the, you'll occasionally hear criticisms by people who work with the homeless that all this nonprofit housing is not helping the homeless. And they're right, that unless you can provide additional subsidy to help operate and maintain the housing, even if you pay the entire cost of acquiring and rehabbing a building or building it new, it's still not going to get the cost down to a level that can be afforded by somebody who's trying to subsist on general assistance or supplemental security income for the disabled or elderly. So, none of the solutions stand by themselves. They all need, there has to be additional, they have to coordinate with each other. There has to be additional forms of assistance and support. And of course, taking housing out of the market, whether it's buying land and building new, which you all know is extremely expensive, or whether it's buying an existing apartment building and then rehabilitating it. It all costs an enormous amount of money. So where do you get the money? And what could be a fairer way of getting the money than to pay for it with taxes on the wealthy, and especially taxes on the unearned rising profits from the real estate industry. And Berkeley has been good about at least starting that process. In 2016, Berkeley passed a measure U1, which raised taxes on the gross receipts of residential landlords. So in other words, it basically said, if you're a residential landlord, you're going to pay an additional 2% of your rent back to the community that we can use to help the tenants who are harmed by the drastic rent increases that are going on. 2% actually isn't that much. Currently, it's a little over $5 million a year, but it's a start. In 2018, Berkeley passed Measure P, which raised the real estate transfer taxes on properties that are selling for, I guess it's about over $1.5 million. And again, taps into some of the windfall profits of the real estate industry. And again, it's a start. I think the current revenue there is around $9 million a year. We're going into another 2-year election cycle in 2022. And I would just say that I think the biggest barrier to creation of more affordable housing is the lack of revenue dedicated to that purpose. We have new court decisions that say that if the citizens gather signatures for an initiative, they can have put a tax measure on the ballot and specify what that money would go for, whereas in the past, specifying what the money would go for required a 2/3 vote. So I sincerely hope that around the Bay Area in the coming year, we see a whole bunch of citizen initiatives to raise taxes on the real estate industry to bring in more money for affordable housing. So I'm not sure where I am actually in my 10 to 15 minutes, but I can, maybe I should just stop there and pass it on to the next speakers.
You have a couple minutes.
Okay. So let me make a small pitch then for the community land trust model. The Bay Area has, outside of New York City, the Bay Area probably has more housing owned by nonprofit housing corporations than any place else in the United States. There's about 60,000 units of housing owned by nonprofit housing corporations. That's all great, but it helps make housing affordable, but it lacks internal democracy. Some of those nonprofit housing corporations have tenant advisory councils. Some of them have a tenant or two on their boards, but we seriously need, the country has a crisis in democracy as well as a crisis of poverty and housing. And we need, those little building blocks like housing co-ops. And housing co-ops, however, by themselves have a hard time. If one building leadership turns over, you lose people with necessary skills. You need an organization that can help sustain those co-ops, provide them advice as to how to operate and maintain their buildings, help them through leadership transitions, provide ongoing training. And that's what a community land trust can do. So at present in the Bay Area, community land trusts are very small. There are only about 500, maybe at most 600 units owned by community land trusts in the Bay Area. So, that's 1% of the total nonprofit housing in the Bay Area. But nonetheless, I think it would be really important for Berkeley and Oakland and other cities to try and put a little more resources into building local democracy through community land trusts. So, if you ask me why am I, as former housing director for the city of Berkeley, working with a tiny community land trust that has 80 units instead of with some big nonprofit organization that has 3, 5, 8,000 units? That's why. It's because I think we've got to put some energy into building up the democratic component of the affordable housing movement. So thank you all very much for listening, and I'll stick around to hear everybody else and answer questions. And Sherry, you're muted.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Barton. And I'm sure we all have questions for our speakers. And if you will please put them in the comments section. We have people who are monitoring them, as Susanna said, so they'll be included later in our program. Right now, I'd like to introduce Alfred Twu. Alfred is a housing activist using skills as an artist and as a Berkeley graduate in architecture to promote creative solutions to the housing crisis. Alfred's experience and training contribute to the long-term vision of land use design, both citywide and down to the foot and inch detail of each project. As a political activist in the California Democratic Party Rent Council and the Alameda County Democratic Central Committee, Alfred fights for the policies and legislation to implement housing as a human right. Alfred?
All right, thank you, Larry. So today I'm going to also talk about some of the challenges as well as some of the solutions, some of which Stephen has mentioned, but I'll go into a little more detail. So our challenges with housing. So the way we do housing as a public service is very different than, say, education or even healthcare, in that, number one, it's not even available in every city. Like some places like Berkeley have affordable housing, but there are some cities that have zero affordable housing at all. So people who live there have no choice at all. But even in the places that do have it, it's not guaranteed. It's not like public education where if you live in a city, the school district has to find a spot for your child. Housing isn't like that. Instead, there's a set number of spots, and anybody beyond that has to be on a wait list, which can often last for many years. And then finally, the construction of new low-income housing has a very complex and costly funding process, having to draw from many different sources with many different requirements. You can compare it to how our healthcare system is very expensive because there are multiple insurance companies with different rules and regulations that add a lot of overhead and drive up the cost. We see the same thing in housing. And next, to go into a little bit of a history of subsidized housing in this country. Started out as part of the New Deal. There was a lot of concern about these slum areas where a lot of houses might not have indoor plumbing or had serious fire hazards. And so it started out as an effort to improve the quality of housing in a lot of the larger cities. And then during World War II, when a lot of people moved to shipyard towns like Richmond, there was a huge housing shortage. And so the government spent money on building housing for the workers. This continued in more of an indirect way after World War II, when the suburban development of the 1950s was heavily subsidized. So at that time, even though the government was not building the houses themselves, it was providing the infrastructure and providing the low-cost funding to back the mortgages at the time, which made the suburbs cheaper than they otherwise would have been for the people who were allowed to buy there. And that was one of the problems that was going on with some of these housing programs before the civil rights movements, is that they were only available for white families. And later on, during the 1960s, because of all the lack of investment and lack of business and opportunities in cities, there was another era of what would they call it, urban renewal, which also replaced a lot of buildings that were falling apart with new buildings. And one of the issues that came out of this is that some of these public housing projects were very isolated from the rest of the city. There might be places for people to live, but there weren't any jobs nearby. And they also concentrated poverty, often near pollution or highways. And so that led to a lot of bad outcomes, which led to it being easily attacked by the right. And by the 1970s, the amount of federal funding for housing had dropped off significantly. So during the Reagan years, they came up with this privatized model of housing, where instead of the government directly building the housing, they would give out these vouchers that we call Section 8 to people to go and get housing on the private market. And it sometimes works, but then in places like the Bay Area, one of the issues we run into is that people might get a voucher, but they might not be able to find a place that they can afford with that voucher, because the prices, the amount of money the voucher is worth is set based on the previous year, but if rents are continuing to go up, they will fall behind. And until recently, when the state banned source of income discrimination, there were also issues with a lot of landlords refusing to take the vouchers. It continues to be an issue today, even though it is illegal. So the main source of low-income housing now that the federal government isn't funding any new ones is mostly from tax credits and nonprofit affordable housing. Like a lot of the buildings you see going up today, like there's the affordable housing in downtown Berkeley, and that is being built by what's called tax credit funding, as well as other sources. The way the tax credit funding works is that large corporations can choose to directly fund affordable housing instead of paying taxes on their profits. So you can see where the supply of funding for this might not be adequate, because when the economy is good, companies have more money that they want to offset their tax bill with, but when it's not, they don't. And then there's also been this redevelopment of a lot of the old public housing from the 1960s. And one of the issues there is that sometimes the new buildings don't contain as many homes as the old ones. And so, as you can see, we've done pretty well in the last 20, 30 years in improving the quality of the affordable housing, but we are still far short on the quantity of it. That's why now you see more of this discussion around social housing. The Assembly member from Fremont, Alex Lee, introduced the bill last year, and then now there was a hearing earlier this week. And the idea of social housing is that the government gets in the business of building housing itself, and it's built for a mix of incomes, which helps address that issue of covering the cost of the maintenance. So the higher income residents will pay more, and the people who have lower incomes will pay less. This is a model that's used in a lot of other countries. And now it's thinking locally. What are some of the funding sources for housing? There's always, of course, the general tax revenue. And then at the state level, there's also funding that comes from the cap and trade carbon tax program. And the idea that was used to justify that is that this is used mostly for affordable housing that's built near public transportation, with the idea that people who live there will drive less than they would otherwise. Because that's one of the side effects of our housing crisis, is you have very long commutes, which is not great for the people commuting. It's not great for the planet either, and it's not great for everyone else either, because we also deal with more traffic and more air pollution. And then at the local level, as Stephen mentioned earlier, we can tax landlords, we can tax property sales, and we can tax developers. The way to tax the landlords is the business license tax, which basically says for every $1 of rent you collect, you have to pay a certain percentage. Right now in Berkeley, I think it's about 2.88%. For taxing property sales, that's what we call the transfer tax. It's basically a sales tax on real estate. And you can tell the power of the real estate industry in that they carved out a lower tax rate for their transactions than everybody else's. So if I were to go to a bookstore and buy a used book, I would pay sales tax of around 10%, depending on which city I'm in. But most cities set their transfer tax as low as around 1 or 2%. And recently, a lot of progressives have realized, hey, we're leaving money on the table here. We can easily raise the transfer tax. And so we've seen not just Berkeley do it, but also San Francisco and in Southern California, Culver City also increased transfer taxes, especially on the larger, higher value properties. So we're talking about mansions, commercial buildings, apartment buildings. San Francisco's highest transfer tax rate is now 6%, which is still not quite as high as sales taxes, but it's getting there. And finally, we have the option of taxing developers. And that can be done through the housing fees, and it can also be done by requiring a certain percentage of the homes be set aside for low income. And that's what we call the inclusionary housing. And this is one of those things where, especially in the East Bay, where we have so many different cities, it's important to coordinate this effort with different cities so that everybody's implementing these fees at about the same rate. Because what you don't want to have happen is City 1 raises the fees and inclusionary requirements, and City 2 doesn't, and then all the development goes to City 2, and City 1 doesn't really get to collect any fees. And so that's why it's important to coordinate. Throughout the Bay Area, we see cities set their rates anywhere from around 10% to over 30% in San Francisco. And we've also seen some projects where 50% of the apartments have been set aside as low income. And one of the main ways that they're able to get to that is that these are projects that also contain office buildings or retail stores or other businesses. So when we think about the development fees, we need to remember to not just look at the housing that's getting built, but also the office buildings, because often that's where the source of the demand for higher income jobs that causes higher rents. And finally, going back to the idea of social housing, there's the idea of cross subsidy, where the rich tenants pay more, the poor tenants pay less. And we often think of social housing as this radical thing from Europe or Asia, but we actually have an example of social housing in California, and thousands of people live in it, but you have to be a student, because that sort of is how the housing model works in the state university system, where the state government through the university is building dorms, and the rents are actually pretty high. But if somebody is receiving a scholarship, they can get that money covered. So that would just, social housing would just be expanding that model to the general public. How am I doing on time?
You're good.
I think we're fine. Alfred,
Yeah, like
if you,
5-10 minutes.
yeah.
Okay, well, if anyone has any questions right now, I'd be happy to take a couple questions.
I think we're going to do that kind of during the panel section, Alfred.
Okay, let's move on to our next speaker then.
Okay, well, thank you so much. As always, it was very enlightening discussion. Our next speaker is Gail McLaughlin, and she certainly is no stranger to progressives. Gail is the founder of the Richmond Progressive Alliance and the California Progressive Alliance. She served as mayor of Richmond and on its city council. She was first elected in 2004. In Richmond, she led the fight against foreclosures by advocating that the city use eminent domain to protect homeowners' rights against the banks. After running for lieutenant governor in 2020, Gail was reelected to serve on the Richmond City Council. We are so delighted to have you back in our community, working for housing and for progressive values. And we are delighted you're with us tonight, Gail.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you to our Revolution East Bay for once again inviting me to participate in these conversations that you have on various aspects of progressive ideas and justice-oriented policies. So I'm always very, very informed by participating and happy to share some of the ideas and work I've been doing. So let me get started here. So let me start out by saying we need housing justice because housing is a human right. I think we all know that. And currently, the housing crisis has been accelerated by COVID-19. So how do we truly get to housing justice and truly affordable housing? Well, I think the first thing we all have to do, and I'm sure we all agree with this, is to resist the greed. For-profit developers are out for profit. That's a fact. They say affordable housing is too expensive to build because they can't recoup their costs with low-priced homes, home prices, and low rents. So what happens? We get more market-based housing and more luxury housing. And that's just what we don't need. So we need to get away from seeing housing as a commodity. It needs to be seen as a human right. And we need government to step in and do subsidized housing and social housing. A lot of what I'm saying will dovetail with what both Stephen and Alfred have both said. I think, we all are like-minded here, but it bears repeating. These ideas are very important for us all to really imprint in our minds. So we need government to play a strong role here. And right now, all of the existing local, state, and federal affordable housing programs add up to only 10% of the money needed to build truly affordable housing. So in some ways, when these for-profit developers say, well, we can't afford to build them because we can't recoup our costs, well, prices have risen, so they can't, but that doesn't mean we can't find a solution and that we should just let them get their big profits. There are nonprofit developers who do good work, but government has a strong role to play. So if we think that new federal programs are going to be coming, well, we hope that's the case, but it's still at this point wishful thinking. And we don't know how long we're going to be wishing. So this has already been said, but social housing is a very real solution. This is housing and apartments that are owned by local government or by other organizations that do not make a profit, and that are rented to people who have low incomes. It's a kind of public housing, but not the kind of public housing that HUD has left unfunded for years, forcing cities to now shift to more Section 8 housing under private management. We need the kind of public housing that provides real quality of life housing to low-income people. European cities have been doing this with great success. Cities like Singapore where 80% of their rental units their housing units are owned by the government. Vienna, Finland, and recently Berlin has a new referendum. This is really exciting. Berlin's new referendum that I think organizations have worked on for years, that was passed just recently, where voters said the government should expropriate property from the big landlords. Now, that's the kind of thing, the kind of radical solution we need. I'm going to follow that. I'm sure many of us are very closely. I think there's lawsuits that are expected and all this, but it's a start, and we have to keep fighting for good policies like that. Now, Finland has what's called their housing first policy, and that provides housing first to people. So, when you have unhoused people, we're often, and this is very important, to provide mental health services and substance abuse programs. But what Finland has done, and they've reduced their unhoused population 30%, they have first given them a place to live, a roof over their heads, and then provided through government housing, then provided the services that they need. Now, in the US, as I said, HUD has failed us deeply. They did not give cities sufficient funding. And now what they've done is require cities to transition HUD public housing units into Section 8 vouchers for apartment buildings that are privately owned. We need more government-sponsored homes, not private-sponsored homes. But Section 8 housing, of course, does help the renter. They only pay a third of their income and the rest is subsidized. But new problems may be coming up. HUD had a lot of problems. Will having more and more of our housing under Section 8 vouchers also show to have a lot of problems? I think we've already seen a lot of that. I know in my district in Richmond, there are a lot of subsidized housing, and I've heard from constituents that they have problems with management and such. So, but in addition to the problems that they may have, those who are lucky enough to have the vouchers, there's not enough of these vouchers, and there's long waiting lines. So I don't see that Section 8 system as the full solution either, although it's certainly important to push for getting more vouchers for cities so we can offer help for our struggling families. Another way that we help with housing justice is by helping with tenant rights. Richmond has rent control. We fought hard for it. We were, I think it was 2016 that we got a rent control law passed, and it was the first time in 30 years that a city passed a new rent control law. So we were very proud of our work, and now we're working hard to maintain that law and help our tenants. And of course, with the pandemic, people are struggling, and more problems in terms of people being able to even pay their rent controlled amount has come up. So, there has been eviction moratoriums and such, and I brought forward a local Richmond eviction moratorium, which is still in effect, which doesn't help with all evictions, but it does help. And I also most recently brought forward a tenant anti-harassment ordinance. In addition, I'm right now exploring with ACE, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, and with our city attorney's office, a way to strengthen our rental inspection ordinance. We need not only to provide affordable homes, but affordable rents, but we need to make sure that all the maintenance and repairs are happening and tenants aren't being retaliated against or harassed when they complain to the landlord. Now, of course, another part of housing justice is the need to help the unhoused. And we know as a result of the pandemic, homelessness has increased exponentially. It was bad before, but now it's far worse. So I'm working closely with a group in Richmond, a wonderful group. I just nominated them for an award for from the county, Contra Costa County, which they are receiving. So I'm excited about that. The name of the group is SOS Richmond, Safe Organized Space Richmond, and they're a great group. And some of the things we're working on, we've been able to fund them. In Richmond, we've shifted some money from the police department into social programs. And one of those programs is to help the unhoused. So SOS, and they're working with Rebuilding Together East Bay North, which is a nonprofit. And they have received about 1.8 million for a year. And so we're working hard to utilize that money in the best possible way. Things that we're doing is we have a scattered sites ordinance where the city is working with churches and houses of worship to have them host RVs of unhoused people. And each church can host up to 1 to 4 RVs in their parking lots. And this is, it's just getting started, and we have about 8 to 10 churches that are already very interested. We're also exploring sites for a transitional village of cabins and a transitional RV village. So we need this interim sheltering approach as we continue to work to provide permanent housing. It's like you got to help people by keeping their encampments clean and trash removed, and helping people with whatever needs they have, food, substance abuse help, or mental health help, but also move them into a much better managed park, like a safe RV park or a transitional village of cabins. So we're working on that interim solution. And then, of course, we're working with the county to get them hooked into the system so that they could get into affordable housing as it becomes available. And of course, we're helping them get jobs. SOS has a great model because they hire the unhoused. A lot of that $1.8 million is going to pay salaries to the unhoused who are helping with the trash pickup, who are helping with the mobile showers, who are helping provide water and food and base and security, and just in general maintaining the needs of those who find themselves in an unhoused situation. So right now they have 20 people that are funded and with jobs, full-time jobs, $17 an hour. So we want to expand on that. The hope is that we'll have 60 unhoused people with jobs over the course of this year. We're also trying to get the county to help us with some sites in the unincorporated part of North Richmond, because it's hard to find sites for transitional villages. There's that NIMBYism that comes into play, so we want to make sure we have enough sites in places away from residents and still close enough to services. And of course, we'll have those mobile services come to them. So let's see. So basically, let me just summarize a little bit. We want to keep people housed who are already housed, and we want to help bridge the pathway to housing for those who are not housed. We want to expand laws and regulations protecting renters with rent control and against unjustified evictions. We want to protect also homeowners from losing their homes to, banks with foreclosures and evictions. That was something that I was working on a lot during the foreclosure crisis, and we can just rev that up again as time goes on. And I know Stephen talked about this, but promoting land trusts is very, very important, and it's a very innovative solution. With this solution, with this option, housing is seen as a social provision, not as a commodity that may generate a huge profit. And housing is built on community land trusts by mutual interest associations and cooperatives. And there's likely some capital gains over years and for the ownership based on improvements of a community land trust. But overall, it fundamentally offers long-term affordability and secure tenure and an opportunity for community building. So to make all this possible, we also need a public bank. So, you know, we need funding to build a community land trust, to maintain it. Nonprofits need it. So need money to, and people need money to help with mortgages for affordable housing. So a public bank is really important. So some of the things that I have done and will continue to do is continue to support our rent control and just cause laws, continue to support the needs of people residing in what remains of our local public housing, expand local support to house people who are experiencing homelessness, and continue to support the mobilizing and organizing of local renters. That's how we get things done, when we organize and put pressure on, you know, whoever, the local body or the staff or the state or the feds. And we need to revise zoning laws so there will not be barriers to social housing. And I mentioned promoting a public bank. Another idea is to rally the building trade unions in support of building social housing. The building trades can often be an obstacle on certain projects, but hey, this is a good project. We want them to be a part of a coalition to build the kind of housing that we really want and need. And so, you know, just building a housing justice coalition, I think it goes beyond one city or another. I think Alfred mentioned this, that, you know, we all are part of a region, and, you know, like homelessness is a regional problem. It could be a regional solution, and affordable housing, the same thing. We could all come together as a part of a coalition. And let's face it, East Bay, our revolution, is already bringing people together. And so we also want to require private banks to lend more for social housing development. And I've been working with the Community Reinvestment Coalition to push banks to provide more investment in communities. And so let me end with just a couple more thoughts. I think I may be about at time. I'm on the interim board of the East Bay Public Bank, and I'm very excited that things are moving forward. It's a complex, long process. I have applied to be on the permanent board and hope to represent Richmond in that way. And I want to just, my final statement is to say that these conversations that our Revolution East Bay holds are so important. I remember the one about the local green or the regional Green New Deal, or, you know, really focusing on taking it away from, not taking it away, we could use a national Green New Deal as well, but to focus also on what we can do in terms of local Green New Deals. And I know Witsky and Mark were both very much in the forefront of that, and all of you were supporting that in a major way. I was very much influenced, so that I brought forward an item to the Richmond City Council, which was passed, to hire a consultant to create, I call it the Green Blue New Deal, because blue is for like waterway job, you know, water-based jobs, because we have a lot of bay shoreline in Richmond. So we want those green jobs, whatever they are, but also jobs to clean up our shoreline and, you know, restore our shoreline and make sure we have that kind of protection throughout the city and on our shoreline that's going to help us preserve the planet as a whole. So I'm very, very excited that we have this regional avenue to explore ideas. And with that, I'll say it's good to be here, and I'll look for, I heard it was great to hear from the other two panelists, and I'll look forward to the other panelists. I think there's one more, and the Q&A period.
Sherry, are you muted?
Sherry, you're muted.
I said, okay, thank you, Gail. Once again, you're always welcome as a part of our Revolution East Bay. Our next speaker is Jake Varghese. He's a fellow board member of our Revolution East Bay. And actually, as Gail mentioned, he is also serves on the board of the Public Bank East Bay. Jake is an expert on the intersectionality of the justice issues, the critical connections between housing, economics, racial equality, and the environment, which we had discussed also. He has used his skills as a professional software architect to propel his activism. In addition to the OR board, he's active in Our Revolution California, and he is the senior architect with the Progressive Coders Network, which is a continuation of the Coders for Senator Sanders. Jake is our final speaker, and he will be followed by questions from the panelists and the audience. So if you do have questions, please post them in the comment section, and we will be monitoring those questions. So Jake, can you take us home, please?
Sure, thanks, Sherry. I'm gonna quickly share my screen here. Let's see. All right, so y'all see that? I'm gonna assume that's a yes. All right, so let me go and present. And so let's get started. So today we're gonna talk about the affordable housing and homelessness crisis, as everyone else has, and a permanent solution. So real quick, my name is Jake Varghese. I'm a professional software architect and an amateur policy architect. I'm a board member here at Our Revolution East Bay. I'm also a board member at the Friends of the Public Banking East Bay, which is setting up the Public Bank of East Bay. And I'm a staffer architect at Progressive Coders Network, which used to be CodersForSanders. So first, we're going to talk about a quick history of real estate speculation, or residential real estate speculation and rent seeking California. This is actually very important because the real estate speculation that we see across the globe now starts in California in about the late 60s, and then early 70s, we get Prop 13. And that's how we get Prop 13, was because Howard Jarvis kept seeing his home prices go up, which means his taxes went up, and he didn't want to solve the correct problem, which is why are the taxes going up. He just solved the problem of his tax bill going up, and then set the property tax to 0.5% for California, which caused other problems and actually increased the speculation because now it's very cheap and there was no resistance. So first, let's talk about something Dr. Dean Baker talked about in his Center for Economic Policy Research report in 2006. I'm sorry for the quality of the screenshot. I couldn't find the original slide, so I had to capture a screenshot of the YouTube video. So the first two bullets are what we're talking about. In the long run, house prices nationally have followed inflation. And in the long run, house prices have risen more or less with rents, which makes sense. Rents and house prices follow each other. When one goes up, the other one can go up. When the other one goes down, the other one usually has to go down too, depending on how tight the market is. All right, so this data comes from the California Association of Realtors, and it only goes back to 1990, but it shows us the actual prices. So you can see here, we start off in 1990 at 287, and you can see this dip here. That's because we were coming out of the SNL crisis in the late 80s, and that's the bubble that we're seeing and that we're coming out of. And then we go into the 2000s, and we know what happens there. So if this followed inflation, the price should be $613,127 for the San Francisco County median home price. We're talking about the median price. Right now, that's at $1.9 million for the median home price. This is ridiculous. So here's Alameda County. Alameda County caught up very quickly. As you can see over here on the side, the scale, it's gone off the scale because we scaled this one from million so that we can see it easier with the other graphs. So this starts off at 226. You can see the dip here, the same as the other ones. And then it should have gone up to 482, but we were already at 1.8 million for the median home price in Alameda County. So here's the Los Angeles one, 215. It should have gone up to 459. And Los Angeles County is much bigger, has much more land, but it still has the same signatures that we're seeing before, because this is not because of immigrants coming in or population movement. This is because of speculation. We'll see that in some other graphs later. So You can see here, we're already clipping at about 800K in Los Angeles for the median home price. So I wanted to find a county inside of California that didn't have as much craziness in its market. So I looked at Fresno County, and you can see here how nicely it tracks inflation for the first decade of this graph. And then we get to the 2000s, and we get that bump. And then now we have the secondary bump that we see everywhere else. So we started out at 82K, we should be at 175. We're actually about 350 in Fresno County for the median home price there. So here's what that looks like all together. You can see how similar these signatures are. This is not because of people moving back and forth between these areas. This is because of speculation. All right, so now let's take a look at the rental prices. So this is SF Metro 2-bedroom median rent. Starts off at $541. If it tracked inflation, it'd be at $1,502. And we're about $3,700 now, which is nuts. Can you imagine what it would be like in San Francisco if the 2-bedroom median rent was still $1,500? How much money people would have? That would be a complete boom for the local economy. So here's Oakland Metro 2-bedroom rent, $478. It should go up to $1,327, but we're actually over around $2,400 now. And then these next two graphs cover much larger areas. The San Francisco Metro covers what you think it would cover, San Francisco and Daly City, and Oakland covers Berkeley, Oakland, and a little bit of San Leandro. The Los Angeles Metro covers from the coast all the way to Riverside. This is a gigantic area. So this is going to completely normalize this out, but you can still see the bumps here. And we started at $538 for the median 2-bedroom rent, and it should be $1,494, and we're clipping $2,000. And that's in the entire Los Angeles Metro. That's not just in Los Angeles County or Santa Monica or any of those high dense places. So here's the Dallas Metro. I wanted to show this to show what would look like outside of California. And we can see some of the similar bumps here, but it starts at 366 and it should be at 1016. But Dallas Metro is about 150 miles wide and 60 miles high. So this is a gigantic area of land, and we're still seeing the price increases in the entire metro. I used to live in the downtown area of Dallas, and the prices there were already at $2,700. One of the reasons I moved to the Bay Area was because the prices were so close to the Bay Area prices, I might as well have just moved. So here's what that looks like all together. And then now let's take a look at the National Home Price Index. So this is a price index. That basically means we start at a certain year and we say this is 100, and then any movement around it is a percentage above or below it. So if we go to 125, that's a 25% increase. If we go down to 75, that's a 25% decrease. So let's take a look at this first 20 years right here. So this is 1955 to about 1975. Look at what's happening to the pricing. It's going down. Well, what happened? Do we have a depression or some sort of shock to the economy? No. This is when we were building the middle class, and we did it at the federal level. So when you do something like that, at that scale, you gain the economies of scale. And you can see that in the National Home Price Index, we can see us pushing the price of homes down dramatically to about 80 points over 20 years. So we were making it cheaper to own the same kind of house because we were gaining the economies of scale of a federal system, of a federal program. And then 1975 is when we have the oil price problem. And since the oil price is in every price, including transportation, that's going to make the price of everything go up, including houses, because we have to transport all the materials that a house is built with. So that's good. That's what's going to push this price up. But even here in 1980, we just get back to 100. So basically for 25 years, the price stayed the same across the entire nation. You can buy the same house in 1980 as you could in 1953 for around the same price, which is pretty crazy. Now let's look at the next decade. So we're coming out of the oil problem, and then we have this dip right here, and then we have a bump up here. What's this bump? This is the S&L crisis bump. And the S&L crisis targets homes, so that's going to obviously inflate home prices. But look how far we went. We only went from 100 to about 118 in a decade. That's an 18-point swing. That's nothing. An 18% swing over a decade is manageable. And now let's look at the next decade. So 1990, we're coming out of the this S&L crisis, which is the bump we saw in the other graphs. And then that started in 1990. And then we're coming down a little bit. And then we start skyrocketing towards the end of the 90s. Well, we know what that skyrocketing is doing and where it's coming from. But look at this, 2 decades, and we go from 118 here to about 125 here. So that's only a 7-point swing for that decade. So this whole time, we only have a 25-point swing in 2 decades. Now look at this last decade. This data only goes up to 2006. So look at how we go from 125 to about 180, 185. That's like a 60-point swing, and we're not even done with the decade yet. This is definitely not because of population movement and immigration. This is because of speculation. And in the 2000s, we lifted the foreign capital control. So now we have more money coming in from outside doing it. And then we know what happens later. This graph falls down and then comes back up because after the 2008 crash, everyone didn't have any money. They lost their homes and only the rich people had money, and they started buying up all the homes, pushing the prices up even farther again. All right, so now let's look at Dallas County and Travis County price index. So Dallas County is Dallas, Travis County is Austin. So these two graphs are the dotted graph is the residential population of that county, and the line graph is just the price index. So we started 1980 at 100, and in that 40 years, Austin has tripled in its population. It went from 350,000 to just over 1 million people. And you look how steady that growth is. It's almost like a straight line. And look at the Dallas growth. You can see it goes up to 300, just clips over it. So we have a 3x increase for 4 decades. And then look at the Dallas line. The Dallas line doesn't even get to 200. It only gets to about 75% change in the population. And then look at the housing price graph. We have this bump here, and then, but it's not following this graph. And now look here, we're tracking in Austin a little bit for this decade. And then we start pumping up, which we know what's about to happen here. And then we start pumping up again, and then again, not following the lines. If it was following the population, both of those lines would be parallel to each other. The same thing in Dallas. Look at how similar the line pattern is. Even though the population growth is less, that's not because of the population growth. That's because of speculation. Now this graph is scaled to 600. So at the very end, we have a 6x increase in home prices in Austin. So we go from 100 to 600 at the end. Now look, if we go this first 3 decades, we only get to 300. And then the last decade is like another 300. Now let's look at, whoops, wrong direction. Now let's look at LA County and Fresno County. This is crazy. LA County is the blue line. Fresno County is the red line. Fresno County goes from about 350,000 to 700,000. So it's a doubling over 40 years. Los Angeles County doesn't even hit 50% increase, but both of the price graphs are the same. How is that possible? This is not following population or immigration. This is following speculation. And look, this goes up to 700, this scale. This is for Los Angeles. Now check out San Francisco and Alameda County. Same freaking graph. Look at the population change. Alameda County gets up to 50%. San Francisco hasn't even gotten up to 25% in 4 decades. Yet somehow this graph is going nuts. This scale is at 1100. That's an 11x swing from 1980. This is not because of immigration or population growth. All right, so this is what that looks like together. All right, so now let's talk about how to solve this problem. And I'm an engineer, and so I don't like talking about Band-Aids. I want a permanent solution that will be solving this problem forever for us and for all future generations. So again, I'm an engineer, so we normally start out with the problem statement, supplemental data, and then the solution. I already showed you the supplemental data, so now we're going to get into the problem statement. The affordable housing crisis is a 2-part problem. First, the land prices are overinflated because of speculation and rentiers, and 2, there is not enough supply. Speculation and rentier class are the same things to me. Land has a particular attribute where you can rent it out while you're speculating on it. You can't do that with food, you can't do that with gold, and you can't do that with oil. You can't do that with anything else, but you can do that with land. So normally when you speculate on something, you're trying to get the arbitrage. You're buying at some level, pushing it up to some other level and getting the difference. With land, you can buy it at some level, rent it out, gain that money back, and still get the difference in profit. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we have to fix the land prices first. And then number 2, as many of the other speakers have talked about, we need to create an agency that combines a community land trust plus a public real estate developer plus a public general contractor plus a citywide, countywide HOA. This will take care of the entire residential real estate life cycle and be our social housing agency. So let's talk about part 1. The land prices are overinflated because of speculation and rentiers. Who are these rentiers and speculators? Well, they come in 3 classes: the foreign speculators, the domestic speculators, and then the flippers and dumb buyers. So if we want to fix this, we should create a 3-layer system that creates resistance to their speculation in the real estate market. And layer 1 should target foreign speculators. Layer 2 will target the domestic speculators, and then layer 3 will target the dumb buyers and flippers. So if we do that, we can do that with a multi-level graduated property tax code based on the number of homes you own. This will create resistance against speculation, and we can build it in a way that protects primary residents and is very flexible, so it can be mapped to the locality of how tight that market is. So first, let's redefine the concept of a primary resident. Right now, we define a primary resident as someone that has residency in a city or locality. So if you own a home in Alameda County, you can be a primary resident. That's not good enough. What we're trying to do is find out who wants to be part of the fabric of that community. And if they're part of the fabric of that community, then guess what? They're going to pay their city income tax, which we're going to require them to do as a condition of primary residency. They're going to pay their state income tax and payroll tax on at least 90% of their global income. And they're going to pay their federal income tax on at least 95% of their global income. So San Francisco is the only city I know of in California that has a city income tax. Alameda County does not have that. So Alameda County wouldn't use number 2. It would just be, they would just use number 3 and number 4. So that's an example of how flexible the system is. If it doesn't make sense for that area, then it doesn't need to be used. But doing this, we're basically saying, if you're really a primary resident, not only will you have a home here, but you're going to pay the taxes for here. That will make you part of the fabric of this neighborhood. So let's talk about layer 1 and how we target the foreign speculators. So we're talking about foreign speculators. So these are people that come into the California market from outside of it and have money to buy real estate in the hottest markets on the planet in cash usually. So if they have that kind of money, then they have plenty of money to pay extra taxes. And the tax table is based on the tightness of that market. So San Francisco and NYC have really tight markets. So we're going to say the very first home a foreign speculator buys is 15% property tax. The second home is 20%, third home is 30%, fourth home 40%, fifth home 50%, et cetera. Alameda County has a slightly lower heat in its market, so we can actually slightly lower this for foreign speculators and say the first home is 10%, second home is 15%, third home is 20%, 30%, 40%, et cetera. And then Dallas and Austin have much more land, so they can be a little bit more generous and say the first home is still 10%, but we'll give you 2 and 3 for 15%, 4 and 5, 20%, et cetera. And then let's say inland California and other parts of California will probably fall somewhere between Alameda County, the Alameda County table and the Dallas table. So that takes care of the foreign speculators. Now let's talk about the domestic speculators. These are people who are technically primary residents. They pay their city tax, their state income tax, and their domestic and their national tax, and they also have one home, their primary residence. Now we're talking about all the other homes that they're owning, and that is going to depend on where they own it. So if they're in San Francisco, well, that market is too tight for you just to have many homes in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the very first additional home or your second home in San Francisco, we're going to add +2 points to your tax rate. So normal tax, I believe, is 0.5%. I know in Alameda County, it's like 1.1. So this would take it up to 2.5 for your second home. And then your third home or +2 additional homes, we're going to go all the way up to 7. So now we're at 7.5. And then we're going to keep grading it up to create resistance against people buying many homes. Alameda County obviously has less heat in its market, so it can be lower. It can lower its tax rate. So the second home for an Alameda County resident could be +1 or 2.1% if it's 1.1 plus another 1. And then the second additional home will be +3, so that'll be 3.1 or 4.1%, and then on and on. And then Dallas and Austin and Seattle have a lot of land, so they can be much more generous. They can say, look, your second home, we're going to give it to you for free and no additional tax. But your third home +2, we're going to add another 2 points to that. And Texas does not have income tax, so they get everything from property tax. The property tax in Texas starts at like 2.4% and it goes up to like 2.8 depending on what city you're in. So that would bring that up to 4.4% or 4.8% depending on where you are. So that's how we create resistance to the domestic speculators. So now let's talk about flippers and dumb buyers. Technically, we're now all dumb buyers. We have no choice anymore. We can't walk away from a sale because some number is crazy, because now there's so many people in the market that somebody will buy that house in cash within 4 days. And so we have to deal with the market as we is. So now we're all dumb buyers. So number 2, housing appreciates at the rate of inflation. We talked about this at the very beginning of the talk. Let's call this the general rate of appreciation. And we want this solution to punish flippers, but reward commitment to the community. So we're going to have a reward for those that stay a while in their house. They're trying to be part of that neighborhood. So let's talk about what that looks like. It's going to be the bonus points. The bonus points are reward for residency and being part of the community. And we're going to calculate it with a very simple formula, years at residence times 2 points. Now the layer 3 is a transaction tax. It's not a property tax. The first 2 layers are going to be property tax, just like all other property taxes that we pay. This layer is going to be a transaction tax on the sale. And what we're saying is, if we look at this table over here, there's going to be an allowable sales price that we're going to allow you to sell. And anything over that, you're going to be responsible for this tax, depending on how much over you are of the allowable sale. So if you're 1 to 4% over, we're just going to charge you a flat 2% on the difference. If you're 4 to 6% over, we're just going to charge you a 5% tax. 7% over, 7, 8%, 8, and we're just going to match it on down the line. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So can y'all see this? Examples of layer 3 tax? Sherry, is your head nodding? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so first again, note general appreciation rate equals inflation, which is around 1 point, plus 1.5 points, which is, we're gonna use it 2.5%. California already knows this. Prop 13 limits appreciation for housing at 2%. Where did they get that number from? Why can't they just say it at 0.5% or 1%? Because they knew that was the normal appreciation rate for housing across the rest of the country. But instead of finding out why theirs is blowing up, they just set it at 2%. So let's take a look at example 1. Johnny Flipper, these 2 examples basically cover the spectrum of different buyers. So there's Johnny Flipper at the worst end. They're just buying the house to flip it really quickly. And then we're going to have another example, which is the homeowner that's living there. So Johnny Flipper purchased a house a year ago for $100K, and he wishes to sell it this year after he's fixed it up. Let's see how much he could sell it for without incurring the layer 3 tax. He spent $50,000 to renovate the home, so we're going to add that into the equation also. That $50K includes all the labor and profits from the renovation. So in other words, $50K is what he would have charged someone else to do the exact same amount of work in their house. So it already includes his material profits and his resource profits. All right, so let's calculate the appreciation. 100,000 that he bought it for, plus 50,000 in renovations, times 1 year of appreciation will give us 3,750. So the total value with its appreciation is 100,000 plus 50,000 plus the appreciation 3,750, which is 153,750. All right, I know this is going to be some math, but I promise you it's simple math, and this math is only just to show you that it's fair. No, if we actually implement this, this will all be calculated for you. All right, so now let's add his bonus points. He's only been there for over a year. Remember, the calculation is 2 times number of years. So he only gets 2% as a bonus. So the bonus amount is 153,000, his total value with appreciation, times 2% or $3,000. So now we add all that together, 153 plus the 3,000 in bonus, and we get a total allowable sale price of 156,825. That's how much he can sell it for before incurring any layer 3 taxes. Remember, he bought the house for 100,000, he put in 50K, and we're giving him an extra $6,800 just because we're cool. Now let's talk about the first scenario. A buyer wants to pay 165K for the house. Okay, that's 81.75 over the allowed price, which is 5.2% over the allowed price. So if we go back to our table, if it's between 4 and 6, it's a flat 5%. And so we take 81.75 times 5%, and it'll be 408 that the buyer pays. And so this tax is on the buyer and the seller. We're trying to create resistance against stupid prices. So the buyer will pay 408 and the seller will pay 408, and the city would make $817 out of this. Now this transaction will probably go through. This is not that much resistance, and they'll probably just say, all right, we'll go ahead and pay this tax. Now let's go to scenario 2. A buyer pays 185K for the house. That's 28K over the allowed price, which is 17.9%. So we do 28K times 17.9, or $5,000 the buyer pays, or $5,000 and $5,000 the seller pays, and the city will make 10K. This one, now we're getting up there in the resistance. This may or may not go through. So let's go through to scenario 3 and see what happens if we go higher. So now we're buying it for 275K. So that's 118 over the allowed price, which is 75.3% over the allowed price. So we do 118 times 75.3, 89K that the buyer would pay and 89K that the seller would pay. If this transaction actually went through, the city would make 178K. Obviously, the whole point of these taxes isn't because we want people to pay the taxes. It's because we want people not to do the behavior. That's the whole point of this. We don't want this sale to go through, but if they have the money, fine, we'll take it. So scenario 4, a buyer wants to pay $150K for the house. Since this is under the allowed price, there will be no L3 tax. All right, so this one is going to be closer to everyone else. So Jane purchased her home 40 years ago for $60K, and she wishes to sell it this year. So let's see how much she can sell it for without incurring the layer 3 tax. So her appreciation is $60,000 times 2.5% times 40 years, or $101,000. So if we add that together, we'll get the total value, which is $60K plus $101K, which is $161,103.83. So she bought the house 40 years ago for $60K, and with all of her appreciation, it's $161K now. So now let's add her bonus points into the mix. She's been there for 40 years, so that's 2 times 40 or 80%. And so 80% of 161 is 128.83. So if we add that together, she's allowed to sell the house for $289K without incurring any layer 3 tax. So she bought it for 60. We gave her, she gets 161K for appreciation, and then we're giving her another extra 128K just for being chill and being a part of the community. So that's how much she can sell it for without incurring any layer 3 tax. So let's look at scenario 1. A buyer wants to pay $300K for the house. So that's 10K over. So that's 3.4%. And if it's between 1 and 4 points, we're just going to do a flat 2%. So that's 10K times 2%. It's $200 the buyer pays, $200 seller pays. This transaction is most likely going to go through because I'm sure both sides can handle that transaction or those taxes. So let's go to layer scenario 2. A buyer wants to pay $450K for the house. So that's 160K over, which is 55.2%. And 160K times 55.2, 88K on the buyer side and 88K on the seller side. Hopefully this transaction wouldn't go through, but if it did, the city would make $176,000. And now let's go to scenario 3. A moron with too much money really wants the house, and he wants to pay $875K for the house. Okay, that's $585,000 over the allowed price, or 201.7%. You guys see where this is going, right? So if we do 585K times 201, that's 1.1 million that the buyer would pay and 1.1 million the seller would pay. If the buyer has that much money and wants to pay for it, fine. We'll take the $2.3 million in taxes that this sale would generate. But obviously, I'm hoping no one is ever dumb enough to do this sale or this deal. That's the whole point of these taxes, is not to make money for us, but to stop people from buying up homes at ridiculous prices when they shouldn't be that high. All right, so that is the end of layer 3. So that's layer 1, 2, and 3. So has this been done before? Not as comprehensively. Singapore has a system like L3, but it's not graded. And Vancouver has a similar system, but it's foreign investors only at 20%. So here's what the Singapore system looks like. The first property is a Singapore citizen. There's no transaction tax. The second property is 12%. Third property is 15%. Foreigners pay a flat 20% on all properties. And check this out, entities or corporate entities buying residential real estate property pay a flat 25% on everything they buy. And then here's the article for Vancouver. It starts off at 15%. In 2018, it bumped it up to 20%. And it had a dramatic cooling off effect. It didn't lower the prices, but it stopped it from going to 4.5 million. Now it's just sitting at 3 million. All right, so what are the benefits? Well, the obvious one, the land prices will come down, so housing prices will come down. But as we talked before, housing prices and rent prices are tied together. So this will also bring rent prices down. And it will also bring commercial rents down. Go to any city, and I promise you the poorest area of that city will have the cheapest commercial office space. But here's one most people don't realize. Other prices will come down because the land price is in every price. So the way to think about this is if you were a chef and you wanted to create a restaurant, the rent for your restaurant is in every single price of all the food you create. And if you're trying to be local, and so that means you have to pay for the land prices, the local land prices, all the way down your supplier chain to the source. So that's going to aggregate the price up and make everything more expensive. If we can lower the prices across that chain, everyone will be able to lower their prices. Even if they split the difference, it would still be a dramatic drop in prices for everything. All right, so now we're going to go to part 2. That was part 1, dealing with the land prices. So part 2 is not enough supply, partially because of part 1, but also developers don't want more supply. They're trying to maximize their profits every freaking quarter. They don't want more supply because if they have more supply, that's going to bring down the rent and make them less profit. Also, developers don't bring value. As Dr. Barton talks about, if a developer took a luxury, one of those San Francisco luxury apartments and put it in the middle of California, in the middle of nowhere, does anyone think they would even come close to making the amount of money that they make? I would bet 100K that they wouldn't even break even in a decade. It's because they're not the ones bringing value. We are. They're extracting our wealth through shelter. And we need to put an end to that. How? Well, the new agency. So we've talked about the municipal land trust, but if we add a public real estate developer, a general contractor, and a citywide HOA to the system, it would take care of the entire real estate lifecycle, including maintenance. This agency can have a threefold mission to oversupply the market with high quality, highly affordable rental units in 3 tiers: transitional housing for the homeless, affordable housing, and affordable luxury housing. I put luxury in quotes because if you've ever been to a luxury apartment, it's not that much nicer than a regular apartment. It may have like some very slightly nicer appliances and countertops and a valet service, and that's it. If we deal with the entire housing market, we can, through economies of scale, bring down the price of everything. Number 2, it will refresh decaying neighborhoods with minimal gentrification. And number 3, build up commercial space for startup incubators that go beyond tech and into the arts and the nonprofits. So transitional housing for the homeless will have full wraparound services with social workers, rehab centers, Medicare and VA caseworkers, training areas with specialists, mental health professionals, and child services. It will be fully furnished and all bills paid, and it will have any other services that are necessary to help with the homeless. Transitional housing is probably the best investment we can make because once we get those people transitioned back into the community, they're now making money. They're paying those taxes. They're basically paying back what we use to help them get back into society. So affordable housing, we can take advantage of economies of scale. We should use the formula of 20% after-tax income. I hate that we say a 30% pre-tax income is affordable. It's not affordable, it's survival. 20% after tax is affordable. Everyone gets their paychecks with their taxes starting taken out. The money that goes into their account is after-tax income. We should have a hard reservation of 50% for low to medium income and a soft reservation of 25% for low to medium income. We should build them to have excellent maintenance, to be highly maintainable with high efficiency. They should have good amenities like gyms, business centers, common areas, in-unit washer and dryer, et cetera. And here are some examples of ultra-dense versions of the housing that we can build. Some of you have probably seen these towers before, but have no idea what city these are in. That's because these are cookie cutter towers. Cookie cutter towers are not that expensive to build, and they're pretty nice. And these ultra-dense ones we can place in ultra-dense areas like Oakland, and inside of them, we can actually have childcare centers and some other services that come with it. So what are the benefits of doing this? Well, we have much lower rent because we're placing added pressure on the rental market. We gain economies of scale, which help us to move and make markets like having more higher energy efficiency, newer technologies, even greening the entire construction process and demanding more recycled concrete, more recycled steel, more recycled drywall, and more recycled everything else that we need for building this housing. So what are the counter arguments that I keep hearing? We'll get sued, Prop 13. Who cares? We're going to get sued, okay? If we take $1 away from the real estate developers, they are going to sue us. We need to stop worrying about them suing us and start worrying about building the best damn solution we can build that's a permanent solution for everyone and will maintain affordable housing in this area forever. Then we deal with the fight. I'm from Texas. I've watched Republicans do the dumbest things when going to court and still win. And even when they lose, they still get partial wins. We actually did the same thing here in California. We blew a hole through Prop 13 and 218. We should not be afraid of doing that and taking advantage of that. So what will happen to the poor developers? Who cares? They'll be fine. They'll still be able to develop whatever they want to. They're just going to have competition that isn't trying to maximize profits. So what about homeowners that go underwater when their home prices come down? This is a valid concern. And the legislation will have the city and the county compelled by law to do whatever is necessary to protect primary residents from going underwater. And Gail McLaughlin is a master of figuring out how to do whatever is needed to helping people. She's already come up with one of the solutions. Number 4, there will be less jobs. I hear this a lot from the union people. No, we already talked about that residential real estate developers are trying not to supply the correct demand. They are not trying to build what we need built. This agency is trying to oversupply the market, which means we have to build a lot. That's going to be a lot of jobs for all construction workers. All right, so that's it for me. I went through this very quickly. I left out quite a few details also. I know there's a lot of elected officials and community activists here. If anyone wants to go, want some help drafting real legislation that includes all of this, I'd be more than happy to help. These are the links for the talk, Affordable Housing Part 1, which is the taxes that we're talking about. This is the Medium page, which has my other writings and musings on them, along with the affordable housing, plus that example page that I showed you. And then here's a link to the California Supreme Court, where they ripped that hole in Prop 13. So that's it for me. Thanks a lot. And I'll get back over to Sherry.
And I will unmute, and I will go to Susanna, who will introduce our panelists.
Awesome. Thank you. A lot of great information, Jake. I think my head is spinning. But I like solutions. Solutions are good. And I'm kind of appalled. I've heard this through a lot of different things that progressives are trying to do. That fear factor. We should be afraid of developers. We should be afraid of the union. We should be afraid of getting sued. I don't know, man. I've met a lot of lawyers that are on the progressive side. I think they've got our back. So great presentations, everyone. I've got a few questions that have been submitted. There's a couple of people monitoring the comments and chat. So if anybody is wherever you're connecting and watching this, please feel free to put a comment in. I want to introduce our amazing panel. We have 4 awesome people on board with us tonight, and they are going to be asking questions of our speakers as well. And we'll give them first shot, and then I've got a few questions that I'll pose to them as well. First up, we have Andy Kelly. Andy is currently on the Berkeley Rent Board, longtime Berkeley tenant, past chair of the Berkeley Public Works Commission. We have Alyssa Victory. Alyssa is a civil rights attorney in Oakland. She is a fellow ADEM delegate. Yay, go ADEMs. And she is an Oakland native. We have Nicole Gardner. Nicole hails from where I live out in Antioch. She is the founder and director of Facing Homelessness. She is probably the strongest advocate for the homeless out here in East Contra Costa County and beyond as well. And she was also an OR Contra Costa endorsed candidate in 2020. And then we have Anna Marie Avila Farias. She is currently with the California Housing Finance Agency. She is a board member there. She's also a California Democratic Party executive board member. And she was also an endorsed candidate by Our Revolution Contra Costa. So these are your 4 panel members. So I am opening this up. We've still got all of our speakers here who are available to answer questions. Just use the raise your hand, either using the little hand raise function or like just physically raise your hand. I can see all of you, I think. If you have your camera on, I can. So who wants to go first? Nicole, you're on.
Hi, so thank you all for those amazing presentations. That was great. I learned so much. So thank you also, Susanna, for the invitation. So I guess I can start off with just being a homeless advocate for years and having my own nonprofit and being really involved with the Unhoused here in Antioch. I am just super excited to see all of the stuff that you guys are doing in Richmond, Gayle. I actually was born and raised in Richmond, so I'm so excited. Like I had chills when you were speaking about all of the things that you guys are doing, because I've been advocating for a lot of those things in our own city. I was talking to a team member of mine even yesterday about the Downtown Streets team that they have like kind of all over the Bay Area, and that kind of looks similar to your SOS. I hope I can get that right. Safe, or I was writing really fast, but Safe Organization is Space. Is that what it is?
Safe Organized Spaces.
Safe Organized Space. Okay. And I'm going to do some more research on them as well. But yeah, it's kind of similar, doing the same thing. So I'm super excited that you guys are like in it. It's like that trickle effect, how, you know, the city gave them the funding, and then they were able to eventually get that funding down to the unhoused and get them some jobs and things like that. So I know you were saying that the county has been helping you guys with with the program and stuff like that. And I know just dealing with the county and speaking to people that are, with the county, that they do lack a lot of resources. So have you guys had any difficulties with trying to get the resources and things like that from the county for this particular program?
Mhm. Yeah, so we have, the county is part of like we have an ad hoc committee of 3 council members, or 2 council members and the mayor, and John Joya is our supervisor from the county, and he and some county staff join us at that meeting, and we're always, trying to find ways to get more funding, and we were able to get like about it was not quite $500,000, but to help with from the county, a grant to put HCEB, Housing Consortium of the East Bay, in charge of a couple unsanctioned sites we have. We were originally going to use that money for a safe park, but we ran into some problems with some backlash from the community. So we decided to keep a couple of these RV unsanctioned sites in place and use that funding from the county to help with the services in place, but it's not a good enough solution. So now we're working on a transitional village and such. So we do coordinate with the county. Sometimes it's really hard. We have their core services and such. So we understand we need to do it collaboratively. And we're also seeking grant funding from Caltrans and, every avenue we can that offers any grants we're seeking it from, as well as from we're seeking some land from private owners and such. So I wish the county has a couple of motels in operation. I don't know in East County if it's similar, but it is a problem, but there apparently more is supposed to be coming from the state and the feds. So we want to really make sure we're up there and ready to receive it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Awesome, thank you. So who's up next? Don't be shy. I do have a couple of other questions that I can go to. Nicole, Anna Marie, Andy. Andy's got your hand raised. Go, Andy. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Let's all have you next.
Oh, great. I just want to say thank you for having me here tonight. This is a wonderful presentation. I think the more work we do in affordable housing, to be honest, the more frustrating it becomes, because we have rent control as a primary mechanism, but it's very limited what we can do there. And the failing of rent control is it only helps keep prices down one tenant at a time. The moment someone moves, you have a market rate unit again. And then the other kind of tool that we have in the toolbox is an affordable unit that was subsidized or required in the construction, where it's a percentage of, area median income, the average income. But just because everyone else's income goes up doesn't mean that a low income or a very low income tenant suddenly also had an increase in their ability to pay. And so those tools that are the main things we use help, but they don't address the overall housing affordability of folks who either aren't in those units or overall. So I loved Jake's presentation, because that's the question I've been asking a lot, and a lot of us is housing's too expensive for everyone. And how do we use the value of housing to try to turn the narrative on its head? And so one of the areas that was also brought up is all of the older buildings we have and how much cheaper it is to maybe convert some of those to affordable housing than it is to do brand new market rate construction. And I kind of wanted to ask the panel of speakers, whoever might want to jump in and answer, what ideas they have to preserve existing housing and to convert that to nonprofit or land trust housing. The problem we see it time and again is there's so much more funding for new construction, but those units are almost twice the cost of buying an existing building and protecting the existing tenants. And so I'm just curious, what the panel sees as opportunities there.
Stephen, would you like to start us off on that question?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So recently, the median price per unit of apartments in Berkeley in properties with 4 units or more is around $300,000. So that's a lot less than the cost of new construction. Now, a lot of those properties have deferred maintenance. The fact that landlords are getting outrageous rents doesn't mean that they're pouring money back into the properties, bringing them up to standard and making sure that they'll survive over the long term. But nonetheless, paying that kind of price plus putting some money into renovation is a lot less expensive than new construction, which is these days coming in at easily $600,000 and $700,000 a unit. So the city of Berkeley has what it calls a small sites program, where money is put aside to buy small rental properties. The larger nonprofit organizations tend not to be interested in small sites because they don't have the economies of scale of management, and because working with existing properties has a lot more unknowns than when you build new and you know exactly what's in the building. Unfortunately, at this point, there's pretty much no money left in Berkeley's small sites program. So I would say that the number one thing that's needed is, especially for East Bay cities, but I'll focus in on Berkeley, to not only have a small sites program, but put real money into it, and then to work with local organizations, which are mostly land trusts, that are willing to help the tenants create cooperatives in small rental properties. Because one way that you deal with the high costs of management of rental properties is by getting the residents to take on some of the responsibilities themselves, and make it more like home ownership. Provide them with support, provide them with training, but give them a significant part of the responsibilities. I realize this is getting into a political minefield, but it's one of the things that I find very strange in the politics in Berkeley right now, is that there's a big push for a tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance. And yet, if the city were to pass that, there's no money to help the tenants actually exercise that opportunity to purchase. And there's no capacity, or very little capacity, on the part of the existing land trusts to assist the tenants in that process and to help fix up the buildings. So to my mind, thinking through how do you make a program work, number one, we need to put money into the small sites program. Number two, we need to work with the land trusts to help them buy some of those properties. Because frankly, I think that if there was money in the program, a lot of landlords would be perfectly happy to sell to an organization backed by city money. And then if in fact there's money sitting there and we can't spend it, then yeah, pass a tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance and force that opportunity in. But don't put the cart before the horse. Get the money in place so that you can actually start to buy the properties and build up capacity of local organizations to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Barton. Alfred, with your work on the Renters Council, have you been able to follow up with some of the ideas that Dr. Barton has talked about for solutions for renters?
Sure. So at the state level, periodically there are bills that are introduced to encourage preservation of existing buildings that are lower cost and to turn them into income restricted low income housing. That said, there are advantages of newer buildings. For example, buildings built before the 90s were not wheelchair accessible, and that's becoming a type of housing we need more and more of as people get older. So there is definitely a trade-off with the older buildings, is that they're cheaper for a reason. The Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act example is a good one where it's a good idea, and part of the idea with TOPA was also to slow down some of the speculation by putting in a certain amount of time for the tenants to get together the money themselves to buy. The other things, I know in New York, back in the 60s and 70s, when a lot of landlords were abandoning buildings, the city would take buildings there, the property taxes hadn't been paid, and they would set them up as these limited, what they call limited equity co-ops, where you own the building, but the amount of money you can sell your apartment for when you move out is also limited. So I think coupled with a mixed income model, that could help solve that funding issue, where some of these buildings, especially the ones that are rent controlled, do have a mix of incomes in them already. And so when we were talking about social housing earlier, obviously there's a need to build new social housing, but purchasing some of these existing mixed income rent controlled buildings could also be a way to do it.
Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you, Alfred.
Gail.
Sorry, Sherry.
Okay. I was just going to say that in the city of Alameda, we have so much prohibitions and laws restricting rental property and what houses can be rental property. And I was just wondering, in Richmond, have you been able to get around some of the zoning restrictions to have these buildings be able to be converted for renters?
Mm-hmm. I don't think we've had much in terms. We do have some. There are fees, to become even a small landlord. You have the rental inspection fee. You have the rent control fee. You have I forgot. There's some other fee involved. Oh, business license fee, because it is a business. I think this might dovetail a little bit with what this course of discussion is about right at this point in time. And I'll make this very quick. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jason Hickel. I don't know if he's he's an economic anthropologist, I think from England. And he's all about degrowth, because he says when people talk about the economy has to grow and you have to have increased gross or increast domestic products, or I'm just getting familiar with him myself. And he, I was able to get in touch with him because I wanted to learn more. And he sent me an email and I asked him specifically about housing. And he said this, and this is what he basically is saying, if I was in charge of a city, not that I'm in charge of the whole city, I'm one vote, but I would say that all second homes and all private rental units be brought into public ownership with fair compensation to the owners and made available for affordable prices, with funds dedicated to improving the housing stock and such. So I know that's a kind of a radical solution again, but it's something that could be tweaked, or a variation of it, to look at how a city could acquire more people who have a home and an extra home or rental units, and bring them under the control of the city and utilize it for truly affordable rents. So I know that's not really what you're asking, Sherry, but it's a way to get more affordable rental units in place.
Great, thank you, Gail. Thanks everybody. Alyssa, you are up next, and after that I have Anna Marie, and then I have several questions from people who are putting them in comments. So we'll get to that. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Thank you all for being here and for just sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience with us. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm gonna try to just ask one and we'll follow up with y'all directly so we can hear others. For Gail and Jake, I just want to know if you all can explain more about the vision of Public Bank East Bay. I helped to advise SF and Oakland in 2015 on how to create local public banks. And just wondering what your vision is for the East Bay, if this is oversight or you're going to advise East Bay localities that want to create a public banking structure, or what kind of timelines you're looking at for implementation for local governments to do this.
I'm going to defer to Jake on that. I think he's been more active in it right at this point in time.
Yeah, we're actually really close to building a bank. We're getting the charter and the application ready. What the original bank is going to be, it's going to be the Public Bank of the East Bay. We want it to actually be the East Bay area. So the first 4 agencies are going to be Richmond, Berkeley, and Oakland, and this county of Alameda. And so those are going to be the founding agencies. And the way the board is going to work is we're going to have something along the lines of 5-5-5. So we have 5 community agency or 5 community representatives, 5 financial and banking representatives that know how to do all the compliance and legal regulations, and then 5 city, county elected official representation. And so that is the gist of how the bank would come up. It's going to be a full bank, but it's going to be a wholesale bank. So you're not going to actually be able to go there and get a checking account. What that bank will actually help is it will partner with all the local financial institutions to help them become more powerful and help them basically put out more financing into the community with better rates. Hopefully I answered some of the question.
Just as a follow-up, from what Stephen mentioned, that some cities are moving forward with TOPA, tenant opportunity to purchase, but there's kind of a missing gap in tenant groups having the funds to be able to outright purchase their buildings. Do you envision the public bank being able to fill that type of financing gap?
Yes, it may not be directly through the public bank unless like Berkeley, if Berkeley, the city of Berkeley does it, it can probably just go to the public bank. But if it's going to be like the tenants are going to be able to purchase with money and they're going to need to find financing, they would probably go to a local bank, and that bank would partner with the Public Bank East Bay, and we would come up together with the solution. We'd probably already have some program for this in place, but then that would help those tenants purchase the housing.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And next up, I know Anna Marie had a question. So go ahead, Anna Marie.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I didn't know if you wanted me to go ahead and talk about a little bit about Cal FHA and just, yeah, Kitty, or it's up to you.
No. Go ahead. You have great information.
Okay, great.
So.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's great to see so many housing advocates. I'm Anna Marie Avila Farias. I've actually been operating in the space of affordable housing for coming up on 30 years. I've had the pleasure of working in various cities and counties, Contra Costa, San Francisco, Alameda County. I'm currently a board of director for the California Housing Finance Agency Board, which is the largest bank, the state bank that finances affordable housing throughout the state of California. And we administer all the tax credits and the bond money that we administer to banks locally and nonprofit developers. For Contra Costa specifically, it's been really frustrating. We are the only county that has yet to pass an affordable housing bond. And I think really before, there's so many programs and we've been so progressive in so many other parts of the Bay Area and other parts of California, but we can't just seem to get our act together here in Contra Costa and get some real leadership. So I think my lesson learned in all my years of practicing is there has to be political will, and it really needs to start with our county board of supervisors. And we just don't have the political will there to really put together public policies, this fragmented Band-Aid effect that, we have probably Richmond's the most progressive city around affordable housing. But other than that, every other city in Contra Costa is not doing anything robust enough to really address the crisis. And as the crisis already exists, it keeps growing and compounding. And so that's really unfortunate. So the best thing we can do is really to start organizing. The other thing that's really missing from this county is we really need more affordable housing developers to come and develop in our county. They're not going to come here unless our cities start creating programs to encourage land use development in the municipalities or in the county. I'm hoping this year, there's a lot of us already thinking about this. We're really hoping that we can really get on the 2022 ballot, an affordable housing bond, and we're organizing. So please reach out if you're interested in working on that, because I think that's really critical to solving a lot of our problems, or at least not solving, but at least starting to create programs at the local level, is getting the County Board of Supervisors to acknowledge that it is time that we pass a robust affordable housing bond in Contra Costa County. And having a bond then allows us to create these programs and create these partnerships. We needed to address, homelessness in Contra Costa County. We need to be able to create emergency housing. We need to be able to create transitional housing, and we need to create permanent and then home ownership. And right now there is nothing. The state, beyond the state of California, we don't have the nonprofits here. So therefore they're not going to go to the state and say, give us money. I mean, who's going to go apply for that? The city? No, because you need housing practitioners who know what they're doing to do. You need developers and housing practitioners to be able to do these applications to get this federal money and state money to bring it down to the municipality. So we need to infuse that at the local level. If we have an affordable housing bond that gets passed, then that is the stimulus money that starts to create this synergy around wanting to create these policies. Secondly, another policy just beyond the Board of Supervisors is locally. There's been so much NIMBYism in Contra Costa County. It's so unreal. It has stifled a lot of development here. And the only development that has really passed progressively here has been for-profit, fair market rate housing. And that has been detrimental to Contra Costa, that there has not been a balance of affordable housing development throughout Contra Costa County. And then you have it concentrated in areas. And then, the NIMBYism between the communities is unbelievable. So those policies, before you even get the money, it's like we all need to embrace that we have a problem. We all need to embrace that we need to pass an affordable housing bond, because once we vote that in, that is being the commitment that it's time to create the policies and the programs at the state, at the local level, and to be able to advocate for what we really need in Contra Costa County. And then the low-hanging fruit that all cities should be doing is the state passed ADU ordinance, an accessory dwelling unit. That should be encouraged throughout California. I'm proud to say, as a board member, we just passed the loan program. We are now giving people $25,000 to apply for a loan, and we set up the first $25,000 to start your permitting fees, and then hook you up with a bank that helps you finance your affordable housing unit. And the fact that cities have not, there's still cities in Contra Costa County who have not adopted accessory dwelling units. And that is a pathway to creating a lot of inventory online very quickly. And then coupling it with the state financing tools is a huge missed opportunity. But we really just need to start. I feel that 2022 should be the year that Contra Costa County residents really pivot and organize and first work on a ballot measure to get an affordable housing bond on the ballot. And then the rest is really just strategically planning with the 19 cities of how everybody's going to do their fair share, because Richmond can't solve all of Contra Costa's problems. We have to work together so that everybody's doing their fair share of affordable housing and allowing homeownership to thrive in Contra Costa. That is how we break poverty. And nobody is creating the economic ladder of homeownership from rental to housing because that infrastructure just does not exist. So I'm very encouraged to see everyone having this dialogue and looking forward to being at the table with you all. And Susanna, thank you for inviting me. And I'm happy to answer any questions or give feedback as well.
Awesome, thank you. I've got some questions that have been submitted in the comment section on Facebook Live, I believe. And then I know Andy has his hand up. So Andy, did you have a question for Anna Marie? Or based on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say as to what Anna Marie said about the need for a affordable housing bond in Contra Costa County, and connect that with what was said earlier about that Prop 13 court case. If a community group, even if it's supported by a bunch of elected officials, unions, qualifies that measure in Contra Costa, you all have the opportunity to pass it with 50% support, whereas the Alameda County bond and San Francisco bonds all had to be at 2/3. The power of being able to pass that 50%, those 50% measures is really something as progressives we need to look at, because it's so hard to get that 66%, but we can all get the signatures. And it's much easier to run the signature campaign on its own when we don't have candidate campaigns. So just every time that comes up, I just want to speak about what a game changer that is and what an organizing opportunity it is, because I think conservatives are going to go to the state ballot in the next 5-6 years to try to get rid of that again. And we should really take advantage of it while we can.
Andy, I
Awesome,
just want
thank
to
you.
briefly correct one thing that you said, which is that, and I'll preface this with I'm not a lawyer, but that change in that basically came out of the court ruling California Cannabis Coalition v. City of Upland a few years ago, where it dropped it down to a majority if you do it via collecting signatures. That almost certainly does not apply to bond measures, because it's a different part of the state constitution that is written really differently than the general voter approval requirements. It's a whole other section. So folks shouldn't just, for everything else, like a parcel tax or payroll tax or business license tax, yeah, that applies, but probably not to a property tax increase for a bond.
All
Yeah,
right,
I meant
thank
to
you,
say
Matthew.
parcel tax. Thank you, Matthew.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions that have been submitted, so I'm going to roll through those. We're like bumping up to our end time, so if y'all can hang with us for a few more minutes, that would be fantastic. So some of these questions are kind of directed to specific speakers, so this might be a little easier. Two people, Laura Nakamura and Paola Laverde, had questions regarding a vacancy tax. Essentially, how about a vacancy tax to support funding for local affordable housing? And Gail, this one's probably for you. Is Richmond working on a vacancy tax?
Absolutely. We actually had one a few years back that did not pass, but it was put on by the mayor. We don't have a good relationship with the mayor, by the way, but he put it on, or he advocated for it, but he didn't work on it at all. So it had virtually no campaign, and it did pretty good, but it didn't pass. So we're now looking at doing it again with a campaign. The unions are very much involved with wanting to have that go forward. So I'm not sure if it'll be 2022, it may very well, but yes, that's an important source of revenue.
Awesome, thank you, Gail. This one, I don't know, Jake, you might be the right person for this one. Kevin K is asking, do most countries allow foreign speculators to own land in their country? I know about a few of them, but not all of them, so you might know better.
Yeah, I mean, basically, when we started opening up the world and we try to westernize everyone's economy, we basically said, everyone can buy whatever they want to in your country. And so, yeah, they do open it up to foreign investors. There are places like Singapore and Vancouver. I've heard of something in southern India and in, I believe it's Taiwan, where they have much tighter controls over what basically foreigners can buy in their market. But yeah, it's actually a normal thing to have foreign speculators. We have them here. Once we open it up, the foreign cost controls, all the Chinese money, the Arabic money, the Brazilian money, the Russian money, they all came here and just started buying up ridiculous amounts of homes in cash.
Yeah, didn't we sell the docks in Southern California? I mean, seriously, what bonehead approved that one? Okay, Victor Aguilera has a question. I'm not sure who's most knowledgeable here, maybe Alfred. With the passage of SB 9 and 10, how quickly do you see cities moving into action?
Sure. So these two bills are very different. SB 9 is a state bill that takes effect automatically on the 1st, while SB 10 is a bill that empowers cities to do rezonings easier than before, but the city has to initiate it. So I think I'll talk a bit more about SB 10 because this is more relevant for local government. Is that what it says is that normally when a city wants to, let's say Alameda, for instance, if they want to rezone to allow apartment buildings where previously none were allowed, they would have to go through a very lengthy process. And with SB 10, as long as they're not allowing more than 10 homes on one lot, then it becomes much simpler. Where this can be useful is, for example, if the city has money to build social housing, but there's nowhere they can put it right now, they can change the zoning for it. And one thing that's sort of similar that City of Berkeley is currently looking at is what's called the affordable housing overlay. And what the overlay does is it creates a separate set of rules if you're building affordable housing versus if you're building private for-profit housing. And that's a great way to open up more places for affordable apartment buildings without also opening it up to speculation. And so, for example, Berkeley's affordable housing overlay is written so that if you have a place where currently you're only allowed to build a house, if you're a private developer, that's all you can do. But if you are a affordable housing nonprofit, or if you're the city, then you can build apartment buildings. And so that way the nonprofits and cities aren't having to compete with the private companies for the land. Want to look more into this topic, the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts was one of the first to do it, and that's what Berkeley's proposal is based on.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so I've got one final question. We're at 7:06, and then we'll close out. This is from Paola Laverde, and this is referencing Jake's proposal, and she wanted to know if that only applies to single family homes. So Jake?
No, it should apply to all units, all residential real estate units. So condos, single family homes, multiplexes are kind of really not really a gray area, but they're basically condos or apartments, if you want to call them. Yeah, so it would apply to all types of all the residential real estate it would apply to. We didn't go over like what would happen if an investment trust owns the home or a corporation. There's a special case for that where we increase the resistance to make it hotter for them. And so they had to get rid. The whole point is to make them get rid of all their extra housing. And once they put that on the market, this is going to drive the prices down.
Got it. Okay, so brings us to the close of our event. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. You are amazing as always. Thank you to our panel members, ditto for that. Thank you to everybody who logged on. This will be posted, so please, please, please do share it. This is a critical topic. There's so many things that need to be done. Find Our Revolution East Bay on our website at ourrevolutioneastbay.org. And on behalf of Carol Coyote and myself as co-chairs of Our Revolution East Bay, I thank you. And Alfred, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just have one last thing to kind of tie us together with some of the other work that Our Revolution does. Is that when we're talking about all the speculation and all the companies from elsewhere buying the housing, is that it's tied to the larger issue of income inequality, both in the country and elsewhere. And you can't fix housing without fixing the whole economy because it's a good quarter of the economy. And some of the things that we also need to work on are things like transparency of ownership and other anti-corruption rules to keep people from having so much money in the first place.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, if you've ever tried to track down who's behind an LLC, you will really appreciate that transparency of ownership statement. It is freaking impossible. Okay, so thank you,
Stephen,
everybody.
Dr. Barton.
Oh, sorry, Jake.
Dr. Barton, Dr. Barton, do you have something to say?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just.
Oh, okay, you're just saying bye. Okay.
Thanks and goodbye.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Go off to have a great rest of the weekend. Stay dry or stay wet, depending on how much you love rain. We all love rain. And thank you.